In September of 2023, an arrest was made for the murder of Robin Lawrence. At first glance, this would seem like a regular case of good old justice being served to the people. The problem is, it took almost 30 years for the murder to actually be solved. That's right, 30 years.
Back in 1994, 37-year-old Robin Lawrence was stabbed to death in her suburban Virginia home, not far from Washington, D.C.
Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're talking about the details surrounding Robin's death. Who killed her? Why did it take so long for them to be caught? Does this happen that often? We're going to find out. Let's take you back to November 1994. It all started in Springfield, Virginia, where Robin Lawrence was stabbed multiple times in her home on Reseca Lane. At the time of her death, the 37-year-old worked for the promotions department of Merchants Tire and Auto Center. To make matters worse, her 2-year-old daughter was also there at the time of the killing. It wasn't until days later, on November 24th, that Robin's body was discovered, and she was pronounced dead. Robin's husband, Ollie, was away at the time and couldn't get a hold of his wife. He sent a friend of the family over to the house to make sure she was all right. After entering their home, the friend discovered Robin's lifeless body on the floor with several knife wounds. Their toddler had been crawling around in a soiled diaper. She's lucky to have been alive. At the time, police suspected that the murder was the result of a domestic dispute. As of right now in the United States, around 35% of female murder victims are killed by an intimate partner. You can see why the police initially thought it may have been Ollie. After he was cleared, detectives continued the investigation. They questioned dozens of men around the area trying to find something that could lead to an arrest. In the end, they came to the conclusion that Robin's killer was likely a drifter who was passing through the area. Being that it was 1994, the forensics weren't as sophisticated. Police couldn't find the murderer, and Robin's case was left open. In 2021, only 51% of homicides in the United States were solved. That's right, almost half the murders that occurred that year have gone without any arrests. The country is actually seeing a decline in cleared cases. This is different from past decades where the rate of cleared cases was closer to 70%. Just so you know, a case is defined as cleared after an arrest has been made. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person will be convicted. So just because the case has been cleared, it doesn't always translate to the murderer being caught. So why are so many murder cases left open? Given the amount of murderers in prison, they don't seem to be great at getting away with it. Experts suggest that the reason is simple. There just aren't enough resources. Outside of large metropolitan areas, smaller cities and towns may not have a large enough police force. Want to hear something crazier? Some super small towns don't even have their own departments. They just contract police officers from other jurisdictions. So why don't cities just hire more cops? This leads to another issue. Depending on the economic status of the region, money is tight. Police departments may not have enough in the budget for additional officers. In short, some areas are too poor to solve crimes. There's also the issue of police not being paid enough. States like Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia possess the lowest average salaries for police in the U.S. In Mississippi, for example, police are paid as low as $37,000 a year. While police deserve respect for the work they do, they are still employees. If employees aren't being paid enough, you're not going to see the best results. There are a number of factors that play into a murder case going unsolved. Outside of economics, there's also a racial disparity. Studies found that homicide cases with white victims were 30% more likely to be solved than cases with Hispanic victims. They were over 50% more likely to be solved than cases where the victim was black. Due to an increased tension between police and African American communities, residents may be more hesitant to cooperate. If a person does have information on a crime, they may not come forward. If a witness is in a low-income neighborhood, they may also fear violent retribution from the perpetrator. So what happened in the case of Robin Lawrence? Well, there's no way of exactly knowing after all this time. Chances are that the Fairfax County Police conducted a thorough investigation, but after not being able to find a lead, they likely decided to move on to other cases. At the end of the day, you can't make an arrest if there are no suspects. So how exactly did police crack the case after 3 decades with no leads? Well, in 1994, DNA was still a relatively new phenomenon when it came to solving crime. Nevertheless, police collected a sample from the crime scene and entered it into the National DNA Database. This way, If a matching sample were ever to also emerge in their system, they would have a suspect. In 2019, a DNA test by the Parabon Company created a family tree. Parabon is a Virginia-based lab that helps law enforcement with DNA evidence. It works to identify the relatives of the suspect. With the sample from the crime scene, Parabon was then able to create a composite sketch of what the suspect might look like. The wonders of science. A 3-year search led them to the doorstep of 51-year-old Stephen Smirk. They found him by matching the composite sketch with his high school yearbook photo from 1988. They also matched it with a photo from the DMV taken 10 years after that. Stephen was taking the trash out when 2 Virginia detectives pulled onto his property. According to officers, he consented to answering their questions. Smirk, who lived in upstate New York, was then asked for a DNA sample, which he also agreed to. Police noted that the man was very quick to cooperate with law enforcement. Being that suspects are usually defensive, detectives knew right away that something weird was going on. Later that day, the 2 detectives were on their way back to Virginia when they got a phone call. This time, it was Smirk contacting them. According to one detective, he anxiously said, "I want to talk, and I want to talk now." Smirk was instructed to head to the nearest police station. It was here he made a full confession. He claimed to be the one who murdered Robin Lawrence in November of 1994.
He fully described his involvement. He talked about killing Robin.
And he wasn't the least bit vague with his story. Stephen described every detail of what went down that night. There are some details that they won't even release to the public. What police found so shocking about his description was the lack of a motive. Smirk, a software engineer, was stationed with the U.S. Army in Fort Myer, Virginia at the time of the murder. There was no relationship whatsoever between him and Robin Lawrence. As far as they know, he seemed to have chosen her at random.
He chose her seemingly randomly, and it was a heinous scene.
It seems like the guilt from taking the life of an innocent mother began to eat away at Stephen. After holding it in for 30 years, he may have seen the police interview as an opportunity to finally come clean. What's so creepy about Stephen's crime is that it seems to be an isolated incident, at least for now. Police have yet to find a connection between Smirk and any other murders. It wouldn't be too surprising if months from now, Stephen was brought up on additional murder charges. Luckily, Stephen's confession, coupled with the DNA evidence, led to his immediate arrest. As of September 12th, the 51-year-old sits in a New York jail waiting to be extradited to Virginia for his crimes.
Tonight, 51-year-old Stephen Smirk is facing charges for her murder. Detectives finally cracked this 30-year-old cold case.
And tonight, an arrest and confession. Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Julie Carey explains how familial DNA led to the accused killer.
This is where his trial will take place. He is currently facing a second-degree murder charge. As for Robin's family, they couldn't be happier that justice is finally being served. Her husband, Ollie Lawrence, said that he nearly fell over in his seat when he heard that his wife's killer had finally been found. Despite how long it took, Lauren Ovens, Robin's cousin, released a statement thanking the police department for their work. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, how about clicking on a couple more of our recent videos? Check out how these predators got instant justice behind bars. Or how about the most dangerous female narcos? See you next time.